Hello all, this is James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade, and I am here to talk about Star Trek Discovery once again. And in specific, Season 2, Episode 4. It would seem that at least this episode was mildly watchable. So, it's not the worst episode of the season. That was last episode, so Season 2, Episode 3 was the worst episode of the season. Season 2, Episode 2 was the best episode of the season. This one was just, well, slightly better than Season 2, Episode 1. So it's the next best episode of the season so far. And now let's go into kind of why it was slightly more digestible than normal, and also why it's still pretty terrible. So we had an episode that of course had too many storylines. So we had Saru dying, we had an alien dying, and of course those two storylines were kind of linked in a way. You had Tilly fighting her germ sister and fighting for her life and eventually getting sucked into the mycelium with some help of Stamets and the new engineer chick. So that's another storyline. We of course have the ongoing Spock storyline. And we had to toss in some new faces in this episode. So we had the first officer from the Enterprise show up and make an appearance in this particular episode. And why? I mean, what do we need another random person in Star Trek Discovery for? Because, whatever. We had a new ensign, or who knows what his rank is, but he seems to be part of the bridge staff and evidently sits in on what seems to be department head type meetings, and evidently Linus is part of department head type meetings. And who's Linus? Well, Linus is the crazy alien that sneezes on people in the turbo lift. Yes, Linus showed up several times this episode, making some more FaceTime than normal. In fact, he may have had more FaceTime than most of the bridge people get during a typical episode. And we had somebody say his name, which is, well, a lot more than most of the bridge crew get. So we now know that Linus is the sneezy alien in the turbo lift, and evidently is a science officer, as he was privy to a briefing with the captain with him and Burnham and the captain. Okay, great. So we're getting a little bit more background on characters that don't fucking matter. Awesome. And we brought in a new face, a new character who we don't have a name for. That doesn't matter. Awesome. And we have a first officer that shows up into the story that, again, doesn't matter. Star Trek Discovery is filled with people that don't matter. They don't build up the characters. We don't care about them. They just don't matter. And they can't figure out that this is bad, distracting. I mean, it would be one thing if they eventually built him up and turned him into a character, but they seem incompetent at doing that. The only character that they can seem to figure out how to build up is Saru, who, again, this episode was all about building up Saru, because we already know all kinds of things about Saru, but evidently we needed to know more. So, our gallant co-captain slash first officer slash who knows what he is at this point. Um, well, he's now a Kelpian that is as brave as anybody else because he managed to lose his feelers in this episode because, well, he was gonna die and then he didn't die, and now he's super Kelpian that needs to go rescue his people. But yeah, that's a whole nother story. Woohoo. Um, let's see, what else is there to talk about in this episode? We had the crazy meeting between the new engineer girl and Stamets, which was a contest of annoyingness. We had Tilly evidently getting dragged into the mycelium network after having a hole drilled in her head in order to communicate with the alien that, well, they didn't bother to communicate with before they ripped it out of her chest. But now that they needed to communicate with it, they went to the elaborate measures of drilling a hole in Tilly's head to do so. Of course, we find out that the alien from the mycelium network is here to save the mycelium network from Stamets, who is destroying their home and killing people. And all Stamets has to say for himself is, "I'm sorry. I'll make it better." But we knew that was coming. On a different note, this was a typical Star Trek Discovery type show. Lots of flashy lighting effects. Yeah, flashy show. But there was some improvement in the show in that it felt almost slightly episodic, in that we ran into Alien, we dealt with Alien who almost killed the ship, and we discovered a valuable secret about the alien who died, and his last act of death was to save the ship. And while the ship managed to download all of the really old aliens' memory and data, and so now the Discovery has made it an amazing scientific discovery in a Star Trek-like fashion. So that is probably the saving grace for this episode, is there was almost an episodic episode that had almost a Star Trek-like feel from the point of the overarching episodic episode dealing with the alien. But the rest of it was Star Trek Discovery, and I don't know if they're learning. Parts of this episode make me think maybe they're learning. Other parts of this episode make me think that they're not learning. But, yeah. It's the second best episode of the season, and it wasn't very good. But it was watchable. Well, more watchable than most of this stuff is. Yeah, that's about what I have to say about it. So, we find out about Linus. He says the alien's ancient in his meeting. He actually has a line, which he said 3 words, and that's more than we've seen the navigator of the ship, the pilot, say in the entire season so far. So, hey, Linus is the up-and-coming star of the show, I think. He's going to be the next Tilly and Burnham, and they still haven't figured out a way to kill off Burnham, which is too bad because, if we got rid of Burnham, maybe we could turn this into an actual Star Trek show where people matter and people have to work as a team. But Burnham is still, the person that saves the day. And once again, she did save the day, but with a little help from Mr. Saru, the only other person, well, part of the trifecta. Tilly, Saru, and Burnham evidently are the people that saved the day. Not Pike, not anybody else. And these are the only characters that we've really ever built up in Star Trek Discovery to date. And while I like Saru, and while I find Tilly to be the most annoying character in season 2, and rapidly becoming the second worst character, almost on par with Michael Burnham. And then there's Michael Burnham, who is the most annoying character in the show. And so that is the big problem with the show in general, is that the most relevant characters in the show are the most annoying characters. So there we are. That's Star Trek Discovery in a nutshell, and that is Season 2, Episode 4 in a nutshell. Hopefully you appreciate this video and everything I went through in order to help you guys stay clear of Star Trek Discovery. Until next time, peace and have a great day.